That's a really good point that you bring up about the judging, because I've noticed that when people are talking about their thought patterns, they are almost always apologizing for those thought patterns. So, so are feeling some sort of guilt or shame for the way that they're thinking, rather than recognizing it's just a way of thinking. There's no, as you say, no judgment of it. It's just this is how I think because this is how I survive the day. I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organization. And today our guest is Steve Scanlon. How are you doing, Steve?
Jude, I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing good, actually. Steve, I'm curious, do you have a favorite book or genre you like to read?
Well, that's an interesting curiosity. I like coming onto shows where I don't know what the heck's about to happen. I've never unfortunately been very good at novels. And
Right.
so I think I miss a lot of good stories. I believe it or not, I've dedicated the last decade in my life to effectively neuroscience and neuroplasticity. And so, as weird as it sounds, some of my favorite books are by professors and research scientists that study the brain.
No, I get that. I like reading stories, things that challenge me to think differently via fiction. But I also love reading, business books, and I am definitely fascinated with neuroscience. So I can definitely get that. But I have a question actually, because I'm thinking I read a lot, or I should say I used to read a lot. I read a lot less fiction than I used to, because I spend more time reading non-fiction. But when I'm storytelling, whether it's working with a client or if I'm doing a speech or something, or even if I'm just listening to other people, I do find myself seeing allegories and analogies from fiction in what people say. Do you do the same, but for non-fiction?
Yes. Yes. And specifically to go back to your first question, we can kill two birds with one stone here. One of my favorite books from the nonfiction neuroscience world is a book called Mind Sight by Dr. Daniel Siegel. So Mind Sight. I tell people if I had a Bible, I suppose, in at least my vocational part of my life, it would be Mind Sight. As part of that book, Jude, he rolls out this concept that he calls narrative integration. Our brains tell stories. Stories certainly help us make sense of the world. And so I think now what's really interesting about stories is some of the stories that we tell ourselves might not serve us so well. So, but to your point about when you're working with clients and you're rolling stuff out that you use story and metaphors and analogies, I think it's brilliant that you do that. One, because you're going to connect with more people than you would by just listing out the facts. You're connecting at a limbic level, right? The limbic part of our brain is because stories engage more of, I would say, the full brain. Number one, you need your logical brain to make sense of that, but you need your emotional brain, the limbic system to, not that you need it, it's going to feel something. And sometimes if you just rolled in and here are the facts, people, and you didn't give analogies or metaphors or stories, you'd be missing a whole component of the brain that's our limbic system that allows your clients to engage with you at a very, emotional and, intellectual level.
Okay, thank you for that. So, Steve, tell us more about you then.
More about me. Wow. Well, as many of your listeners will probably note, I'm from the United States.
Mm.
Some of my listeners will note that you might not be. Uh, I was uh, I was born and raised in New Mexico. I went to school in Hawaii and Virginia, and then I ended up in Italy for 3.5 years. Met my wife, moved back to the States, opened up two businesses, sold them both, got into the mortgage industry, and then was in that for quite a while. Then in the late 90s, heard a conference. I was at a conference in San Francisco and heard about coaching. And I guess I'd not even at that point coaching, as you probably are very well aware, it's a fairly new industry, like in the way of time. It's not like being a doctor or a lawyer or anything like that. And so I'd not even heard of it. And when I heard of it, it took me about 24 hours to go, oh, goodness, I'm going to stop what I'm doing and go and do that. I had a background in athletics in both high school and college, had many good coaches. And so I moved my family. At that time, we had 4 kids and 2 dogs, put them in a U-Haul from Denver, Colorado, moved to Oregon and became a coach and have been one for the last 2.5 decades.
Fantastic. So, Steve, tell me about your thing, which is inside out leadership. So immediately I say inside out, I think of the cartoon, which is super cool on a neuro level. But I'm sure that's not what you mean by inside out leadership. So tell me about that.
Well, you're going to be a little surprised. Maybe I do mean that a little bit, because that movie, as you're probably very well aware, Walt Disney, and I looked into this at one point, but Walt Disney engaged at least 4 of the top 10 neuroscientists in the world to help make that movie. That movie is phenomenally accurate with regard to some of its depiction of the human brain. Now, it's a cartoon and obviously, but how we encode memories and stuff. I walked out of that movie thinking there's no way this is for adults. That was crazy.
It was crazy clever. And what I love about that film is how they have Riley having all her sort of little islands of like Friendship Island and family and memories and goofball. But at the end, not only do the emotions realize that sadness is important for everything, is that the final island is all of them merged together. And I thought that's so clever.
Yeah,
because it's bad to be, all your sort of islands all separated, but to have it all merged together is healthy. Well, that was very clever.
It was great. And that is what Dr. Siegel would call integration. They were very integrated. And so again, whether that happens in real life, we hope so, because we are trying to integrate it. And you stole my thunder. I usually go around the world for the people that have seen that movie, Jude, and I say, ask yourself who the hero of that movie is, even with the side story of the kids and what's going on and the brain. But sadness is actually the hero of the story. Yes, joy was the protagonist, but sadness was the hero. And I just thought that sent such a brilliant message to the world that we would embrace all of who we are, because joy couldn't get rid of sadness. It wasn't about getting rid of sadness. And I think our world needs to hear that, right? There's so many people that feel a certain thing like, oh, look at what you and I do. There's so many people that could be out there going, we need to feel joy and happiness. And well, we get to feel those things is wonderful, but to the degree to which we can embrace our emotions and our thinking for who we are, I think this idea that we would stiff arm any emotions doesn't seem very healthy to me.
Yeah, and it also looks at that Riley, the child, she's the product of the parents, isn't it? Because the dad is driven by anger and the mum is driven by sadness. Yeah. And she is driven by joy, but she recognizes that you can be joyful even when you're sad. And I think it's really deep, actually, the way the more you think about it, it's quite clever showing the human condition in from a neuro way.
I make it a point to make it one of the assignments almost with everyone I work with to watch that movie.
Oh, that's a cool idea.
If you're going to work with me, you have to watch Inside Out just because of the questions that it'll draw out. And I think, as good as I think I am at what I do, I'm not Walt Disney. And so their capacity to tell a story. And again, you and you didn't know this. We were going to make a whole podcast episode out of
No,
Inside
I
Out, the
didn't know we were
movie.
going to do this at all.
But the other interesting thing that they did is again, that's Disney has the ability to do that, right? To tell, maybe kids could go see that and have fun with just the whole goofball stuff and whatever. But it is an incredibly complex and deep movie. I did walk out of there thinking, God, if I was 5 or 6 years old, I'm not entirely sure that would have been all that enjoyable.
Oh, I'm not sure because I think kids intuitively, maybe not at deep level, but they get the fact. And I think it's very clever that for children, because it's like saying, you are not your emotions.
Yeah.
And sometimes emotions just happen and you can't control it.
Yeah. Well, you and I have theories about that, and neither one of us may be wrong or right. Like I don't disagree with what you're saying. Mine was based on the fact that during the movie, a child that was probably 4 or 5, because of the way that they acted out, he screamed out, "Mom, is this going to get funny again?"
Oh, wow. That's so interesting.
But I don't know that's hardly a sampling size. I just kind of thought that was
I
there was
watched,
a
I watched, I watched it in a cinema during the day, so there were a lot of children there, and I didn't get that react. None of the kids seemed to, in the audience seemed to get it, to seem to get it. They didn't seem to think it's not funny. But I'm not sure if there was any children of 5 there.
Well,
Maybe slightly
again,
older.
I'm gonna have to go watch it again. I remember towards the middle of that movie when Joy was trying to get back to whatever and find her way through her own memories, that the music got kind of intense,
Yeah.
and there was an intensity to anyway. Here we boy did we stray off track here.
Oh, yeah, I don't even know. I'm sure we haven't strayed off actually, because I think it's a nice segue into
Yeah,
inside out leadership. So
well, and
I think we've put inside out we get. So tell me your
yeah.
thing.
Yeah. So again, that's why I was saying at the beginning when we started talking about it, I don't know that we did maybe stray, because inside out leadership is when we work with people, it truly is more about what's inside than what's outside from a
Mm,
couple of different perspectives. Number one, I think it's largely understood, and I got to imagine your listeners understand this, but there's a fairly substantial difference between internal and external motivation.
mm-hmm.
Right. And we have a world, I suspect, and that I view time after time, promoting, selling, and otherwise dealing in the trade of external motivation.
Mm-hmm.
Almost all of marketing is geared towards, hey, if you have this car, if you drink this drink, if you wear this shirt, if you do this thing, you'll feel better, be happier, grow stronger, whatever it might be. And it's external. When it comes to leadership, and this is I promise I won't be this cynical, but whenever and you have done so much work. I researched what you did, and you've done so much work in this. But leadership, Jude, as a topic from my chair, is probably one of the most researched, dissertationed, written about concepts that we know of, like to humankind. I mean, just if you're in a funny mood, go on to Amazon and just look up book titles with leadership in them. I mean, it's unbelievable. What I find interesting about it is, and yet when you look around at many people, whether it's in business, in the public sector, in politics, you're in Great Britain. Let me ask you a question. If you were to rate, and again, without giving anything away, I don't care about what your politics are, just generally speaking, would you rate leadership high in most politicians in Great Britain?
I think if I looked at politicians worldwide, I think the leadership isn't as high as it needs to be.
And yet it's the most researched dissertation understood. Like, it's not like some of the stuff that even goes on in my country. Again, doesn't matter what side you're on. You watch it and you go, did they miss a day at school? Did they miss that? I mean, like, it's really remarkable. But I partly think it's because we can understand many of the precepts of leadership externally and not internalize them and make them a part of who we are.
Do you think that's because to do that requires work and people don't want to do the work?
I think that's part of it. Absolutely. I think that's part of it. I think, and this goes back to the whole inside out premise. I think if you're going to work from the inside out, yes. So I suspect, yes. One, that's work. And by the way, telling people that they're going to have to work for this sort of change doesn't sell very well now, does it? Right.
Mm-hmm.
What sells in our world is ease. 5 easy ways to make $1 million in 3 steps. And even though you and I can go, that's not real. We all know that. And yet, why does it sell so well? Anyway, that might be another podcast. So yeah, I think that the reason we can embrace conceptually so many of these concepts of leadership and maybe not apply them is because it is work. Mm-hmm. Also because it might go against some of the, think of it as just biology, right?
Let's listen to a quick advert.
The Maverick Paradox. Judith Germain is an author, speaker, consultant, mentor, and trainer, and the leading authority on Maverick leadership. She is the founder of the Maverick Paradox, which supports organizations to enhance their leadership capabilities and to help business owners develop and grow their businesses. Judith enables individuals, business owners, and organizations to improve their impact and influence. She is also HR Zone's leadership columnist, and her expert opinion has appeared in national, international, and trade press.
Welcome back to the Maverick Paradox. This is the podcast for the pathologically curious.
Part of what I work on with people is the idea that change at any level is, you have a brain and I have a brain, especially when we perceive to be our worlds as okay. Well, tomorrow morning, you're going to get up and you have a whole brain that's going, do that again. Don't change anything. Even a good change might be perceived, whether it's conscious or unconscious, as a threat. And so you can read about leadership concepts, but to actually make that change requires changing who we are from the inside. And that for many people is quite a frightening process and work. But to be honest, I think there's a lot of fear in doing that, because what if my changes threaten the parts of me that I currently like?
Yeah, I can see that. Tell me, Steve, I'm interested. What is metacognition?
Yeah, metacognition is, here's a buzzword that we've been using quite a bit lately around in the business world and other worlds, is the concept of awareness, self-awareness, right? I'm sure if I had done an even more thorough job of looking through your whole library of podcasts, clearly that concept has had to have come up with you in many of your guests and so much of what you do, self-awareness. Metacognition is, well, literally, if you want to know, the Greek, the meta is a Greek prefix word that sort of, I guess, implies the thing that follows it. So people that are in the IT world, metadata is the data about the data. So I always think of the word about. So cognition is just a fancy word for thinking, right? So therefore, metacognition would be thinking about how you're thinking. So
I do a lot of that.
Yes, it's a little bit of a trick in the way that I would say it's a little bit tricky, because some people, I don't know, and again, I'm trying to be sensitive to the euphemisms you might have there in Great Britain, but a lot of times people around here will go, man, I'm really in my own head, or she's in her own head, or he's in his own head. Is that language that you've used?
Yeah, it's common here.
Yeah. So if someone says, hey, they're in their own head, let me ask you, Jude, is that generally considered a good thing or a bad thing? Is that a positive thing when you hear that, or negative?
Normally negatively thought of.
Right. Metacognition is the positive way to be in your own head. Because most of the time when you're in your own head, you're either cogitating on a topic and you're going round in circles. We call it Maytagging, like you're in a dishwasher, right? Like you're just going round and round and round and round. You're either vehemently disagreeing with your own self or agreeing with your own self, but it's just a spinning. And it's not productive and it's unhealthy. Whereas metacognition, in the way that we like to address it, is thinking about how you're thinking, but from a very non-judgmental way.
You know what?
So if all of a sudden I feel, you and I are talking, and all of a sudden we were talking about the movie Inside Out, and I grew nervous. Oh my gosh, is this going to be okay? Did we need to talk about this? Whatever. I didn't. I'm just making this up, right? See, I can tell a story. But if I grew nervous, if in that moment I went, "Oh, Steve, look at that," to myself, right? I'm inside myself going, "Wow, how interesting nervousness." I notice that. I notice that I feel nervous. I'm not saying go away, and I'm certainly not ignoring it, and I'm certainly not unaware of it. I'm actually becoming aware of it, but never in a judgmental way. And so when we practice metacognition, it's a skill that we teach a lot of our clients to use to become more thoughtful, more self-aware of, but here's a funny line, Jude, about becoming more self-aware and getting in your own head. Getting in your own head is typically non-productive, and it has some form of judgment, whereas metacognition, at least the way that we try to bring it forth, is a non-judgmental way to view your own thinking.
Thank you for that. I thought I'd look it up while you were talking, and it's got here as a definition of metacognition is the awareness of your thoughts and an understanding of the patterns behind them. And then that made me realize, when I looked that up, is that I do that a lot with the clients I coach and mentor. If we're talking about something and they're saying, I don't know, I feel like I've got imposter syndrome, or I'm not confident this, or this what happened. And that's what I try to help them to do that as a method of moving forward, to become aware of those thoughts and the patterns behind them so that you can break those patterns and move forward.
Well,
I didn't know there was a word for that, so I'm quite impressed.
Well, and as it turns out, I don't have it copywritten because it's probably public usage. So I think a person like you should take that and go put it on your site and promote it.
Well, I wouldn't be promoting that definition per se without referencing back Wikipedia, which is where I saw that.
I've noticed on your site you're big on, if we are going to reference like that, if I'm going to talk about narrative integration, Daniel Siegel made that up, right? That's a product of his thinking. So, but metacognition, to me, when you asked that, we can talk about awareness like we can talk about leadership. Oh, leadership is this and leadership is that. And we serve people and we're this and we're that and, et cetera, et cetera. But the practice of it, how do we actually become, there's all this, if I could give you, here's some funny Greek words. The orthodoxy of leadership, which is basically correct thinking. That's the Greek for the orthodoxy, but we need more orthopraxy, which is correct practice.
Yeah, I like that. Orthopraxy.
Orthopraxy. So we don't need, I shouldn't say that. I'm sure the people that study this at the university level are doing wonderful things. Don't get me wrong, but we just need we need to apply more theory than keep theorizing about what it is. And so metacognition, in the same way, we can say, gosh, awareness is a good thing. Metacognition is actually the practice of awareness. And so it sounds like you were already doing it with your clients. And so I appreciate you bringing it up, because we're trying to move beyond just theoretical concepts and get people into practice.
Practice important. So what caught my eye is where when we were talking about you coming on, you talked about metacognition being the practice that gives us agency over our mindset. And agency over our mindset was definitely the hook for me. So what are the things that can be done to give ourselves that agency?
Well, again, I think people could, if they're listening to this, literally you could begin to metacognition is not particularly complex, right? To learn to think about how you're thinking. What becomes complex is to pay attention to how you're thinking without judgment. Because some people have been doing that their entire lives. And so whenever you think a thought or feel a feeling, that we don't immediately judge it as good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that takes practice, especially if people have been doing like their whole lives that. And so I'll give you two sayings. They're two neuroscientific sayings that come from neuroscience. One is, if you can name it, you can tame it. If you can name it, you can tame it. And then the second, which is Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, had this saying, and he said, what we resist persists.
I've heard of that one.
Yeah. So think of how those two go together. Let's say, for you, it's this evening or tomorrow, you wake up and you're feeling a certain way. And, it could be good or bad, but let's just say you feel anxious about something. And because you're trying to be a better practitioner of metacognition and you have this inner dialogue, wow, Jude, look at that. Anxiety. How interesting. Right. And then I wonder where that comes from. That's so like you would grow. But
you do think like that.
I can tell you do. Like, I think you could have written I can tell that you do. But for your listeners, so a lot of times, first of all, and that's what was so powerful. We're going back to the movie. We were really able to see these characters and we could name them. That is fear. That is anger. That is disgust. That is joy. That is sadness, et cetera, et cetera. And so naming those things, if we don't know what it is that we feel, then it's very difficult to have agency over. Somebody that says, oh, I just woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Well, okay, well, you're feeling in a certain way that you're unable to identify. And so you use a metaphor about waking up on the side of a bed, right? Like, okay, no, what is that feeling? And where does it come from? And that takes practice. And then the Carl Jung saying, what we resist. If one of the feelings is anxiety, most people would want to go, don't feel that, don't feel that, don't feel that. But the problem is what we resist persists. So if you're feeling anxious and you're trying hard not to, it's going to cling to you. As opposed to feeling anxious and going, wow, anxiety. Now, I don't know how people all practice metacognition in some ways, which is, again, back to the movie, to not only name these characters, but to give them a voice, right? I can actually speak to anger. I can speak, now might be internally, but hey, anxiety, hey, worry. Interesting. There you are. I wonder where having that kind of dialogue as opposed to feeling worried and immediately wanting to usher it away. That will not give you agency. It will cling to you, and it might cling for longer than it should.
Also, thanks for that. Also, it's a recognition that these emotions are there to tell you something. So you can't dismiss it without finding out what it's trying to tell you, because it just comes back twice as hard.
Yeah. Well, but I think that's the uniqueness that you and I work on with people. You say you can't dismiss it. Well, you can, and people do all the time. But like you said, if you try to dismiss it, again, that's why I think that's primarily why Carl Jung had that saying. What we resist persists.
Oh, yes. Sorry, you misunderstood. You can get away from these things. But what I'm saying is it makes no sense to immediately move to getting rid of the feeling of being anxious without discovering why you're anxious. That's what I meant.
Yes. And that's exactly right. But I will tell you, that's a practice. People listening to this aren't going to go, I'm going to go change my life and go do this. Actually, you could, but remember, especially for people like you strike me as a person that's been doing this, whether you've named it this way or not, for a long time. I've read about you, and you strike me as a person that has high self-awareness, that you get it and whatever. We live in a world Well, I can speak to the world that I live in. Over here, worry, fear, anxiety, fret, concern, anything that produces excessive cortisol is running so rampant that you thought the
Yeah.
pandemic was bad.
Yeah, it's everywhere, and not to say that I don't feel any, I'm not feeling any of those, because of course, I'm human, I feel that too. But I do want to know where it comes from. When I work with, if I'm mentoring people or coaching people, I find showing them how to utilize metacognition. I like it now, I've got a word for it. Can make such a huge difference. Now, what I'm interested in talking about now before we end, if that's okay with you, is the neuroscience. So I talk with my clients a lot about hacking your brain to make your subconscious work for you rather than against you. I'm curious how you're using neuroscience as a self-confessed neuroscience geek. How to improve.
How do I use it personally, or how do I use it professionally?
How to use it professionally to help people improve their mindset. Although, if it's more useful to share how you're doing it, then that's perfectly cool. I'm just quite interested to hear other people talk about how they use neuroscience to improve their metacognition. I'm not going to stop using that. I'm going to try and find a way of using that word every day.
You're going to build it in.
I'm just loving it now. Yeah, I'm just curious to see how other people are doing it.
Well, number one, much of what we did in this half hour was bringing forth the concept, right? Because
gotcha.
Without even understanding it conceptually, you're not going to be able to put it into practice. So sometimes I use it even with a client, like I said, I don't think it's that complex a topic. But in all seriousness, first of all, when people first start practicing it, they go, oh, I notice I'm thinking this. And if you and I aren't carefully coaching people, what we mean to be a very positive exercise can have them spinning in their heads. And so teaching the non-judgmental part of that is really, really important. And from a neuroscience perspective, again, there are some clients where I get to speak in terms of neurochemistry and neurobiology, and they enjoy that. Others don't, right? Others are just trying to achieve some result. However, you and I both know that the underlying neuroscience might be why they're not getting a result. And so sometimes I get to actually bring the topic forth and teach it as a topic, and then we get to go apply it. Other times I'm just asking people some questions about how they're thinking, how they're going, listening sometimes to help them become less judgmental in their thinking about their own thinking.
That's a really good point that you bring up about the judging, because I've noticed that when people are talking about their thought patterns, they are almost always apologizing for those thought patterns. So are feeling some sort of guilt or shame for the way that they're thinking, rather than recognizing it's just a way of thinking. There's no, as you say, no judgment of it. It's just, this is how I think, because this is how I survive the day. That's fine.
Point. Perfect point. Even shame and guilt, like imagine naming those. Wow, shame. Sometimes when I'm describing metacognition, I just slow it down and practice it with people. It sounds like me talking to me. Hey, Steve, wow, shame. Interesting. Not don't do that. For people like you and I, if you feel worry or shame or guilt, it's pretty easy for us to go, oh my gosh, we're coaches, we teach this thing. How dare you feel that? You help other people's. What's the matter with you? And you're a hypocrite. I have learned to go, wow, that's so interesting. Worry. I wonder where that comes from, and do a little exploration. And instead of moving to judgment, do my best to move to curiosity. Because if I'm going to judge it, then I'm going to try to stiff arm it, and I will fall victim to resisting it and having it persist.
Yeah, I wonder. I don't know. I don't even know how to formulate what I'm thinking, but um, I suppose people struggle to accept what is. It's almost like I'm very driven, and I help
Mhm.
people move into action quickly.
Mhm.
And I think acknowledging something and then moving into action is often more helpful than trying to live with the pain of feeling anxious or worried. Or it's like, okay, this is where you are right now, you're anxious, so let's just do X, as opposed to spend a lot of time talking about not the reason for anxiety but the feelings of anxiety, if you see what I
Yeah.
mean.
And it's possible in that moment that might be the right thing for them to do to get them off the dime. The only thing that I might say is if getting them to do X and not actually dealing with the undercurrent, if it continues to circle and bite them, then we might have to practice metacognition. If it's just a matter of getting someone off a dime to get them moving, I think that's great.
Yeah, but
Oftentimes there's an undercurrent, right? Every action we take, I'm sorry to tell you, which you probably aware of, there's very few actions, if any at all, that have non-emotional attachment. We're taking
totally
actions
get
because
you.
of how they make us feel.
Totally get you, which is what I'm saying is that it's moving into action, and that action could be looking at the reasons why you're anxious. I'm just
Absolutely.
saying that action is more useful than saying for the 15th time, I'm feeling anxious, because
Yeah.
that just makes you feel worse, because you're just re-establishing that to your subconscious, where you might as well spend that same energy going, the reason I'm feeling anxious is X, and exploring that, than just saying, because like just stating how you're feeling is keeping you stuck quite often. What I mean is a continuous, not obviously once or twice, but a continuous statement of, well, I just feel like this, is not going to move you into any type of action
Yeah.
at all.
No, I agree with that. That's hence the curiosity. If you're just going to state it, I feel anxious, I feel anxious, I feel anxious. There's not a lot of curiosity in, right? As a like what you were saying is, whoa, I noticed that I feel anxious. That's so interesting. I wonder where that comes from. There's a curious nature to that. And I agree with you. If we're just going to state it and not practice any level of curiosity, then it might keep you there. So anyway, lots to continue to do. I want to be sensitive to our time.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that that's probably a good place to end, unless there's something that you wanted to talk about, or make a statement of, or whatever, and I didn't give you the chance to do that. Is there anything else
No,
you would like to add?
I thought you drew it out quite nicely. I think I'm going to go watch Inside Out again just because of you.
I can't wait for when the next one comes out. I think it's next month or something.
Yeah,
Ooh,
Riley's emotions developed as she. So yeah, it should be very good. Maybe we'll have another podcast episode after the next one.
yeah, hopefully they keep it in the same kind of psychology rather than just making it a cartoon about a kid growing up, because then that would be really sad.
That's exactly right. Well, thank you very, very much.
You're welcome, Steve. Thanks for coming on the show.
All right, have a good day.
Thank you once again for tuning in to the Maverick Paradox podcast. I am Judith Germain, your host, and I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation.
The Maverick Paradox Magazine. The Maverick Paradox Magazine is for the pathologically curious. Written by a swagger of socialized mavericks who are divergent thinkers, the magazine tackles the biggest issues affecting maverick leaders today. You might be a business owner or a leader within an organization who wants to have your thinking challenged, to be exposed to a diversity of thought, or to learn from diverse experts in their fields. If so, the Maverick Paradox Magazine is for you. Join the swagger at themaverickparadox.com and engage in the conversation.